If you're looking for the next good Foddian game, then you need to play Step by Step right now. Step by Step is a precision platformer Foddian that takes aspects straight out of Jump King and Pogostuck, but controls like your favorite 2D platformers. The gimmick of this Foddian is that you can't stop moving, and the only way to change direction is to bounce off of a wall. This, combined with extremely tight controls and intelligent Foddian level design, makes Step by Step a great challenge for even the greatest of gamers. If you want to do a playthrough blind without being spoiled, go check out the game on Steam using the link in the description. But for now, let me tell you all about my experience with Step by Step. So occasionally, developers will reach out to me by email or on Twitter asking me to try out their game. Most of the time, given my content, it's a Rage Foddian game, and I almost always try them out. So when TrashTripp hit me up on Twitter about this game, I agreed to give it a try. I loaded into this lovely hand-drawn art style and hopped into an online lobby that basically works the same way as Pogostuck's. Your character is this little adventurer guy that is fully customizable with colors and wearable items that you can find along the way. But I wasn't here for the cosmetics. I was here for the raw gameplay, baby. The way you control your character is by changing your speed and jumping. You can hold backwards against your direction to slow down, or hold forward to speed up. If you hold no direction, your character walks at a medium speed. You can jump with spacebar, and you can control your jump heights based on when you let go of the spacebar in the air. All movements are doable in midair, which allows for slight air strafing and maximum control to precisely land on platforms or in gaps. Upon figuring out this palm tree tutorial area, there's also this wall jump mechanic, which gives the player a boost of height if he presses the spacebar and the directional button away from the wall at the same time. You can also bounce without any added height if you just tap the directional button without a jump input. And for now, that was it. Super simple, super straightforward controls, just raw speed and movement from here on out. This early first area is designed with low stakes falls and allows the player to get used to the funkiness that comes with not being able to stop your character's movement. I'll be honest, it took me about 15 minutes to get used to it, but in certain areas in the climb, it still forced me to really think hard about my inputs when navigating tight sections with a lot of walls later on. It kind of reminded me of TikTok to the Top from Ludwig's Game Jam. I really enjoyed this game because of how much it made my brain work at the beginning due to the controls being so complex. Eventually though, the controls became second nature and the movement becomes insanely fluid. TikTok to the Top is incredibly more complex than Step by Step, but this microdose of that sensation had me hooked from the start. This first area had a nice bit of design that really opens up the player's eyes for how to perceive the route ahead. In this sequence, the map sends you left away from the intended entrance to the next area, forcing you to go across this group of jumps. Since you can't change direction, you're forced to execute the jumps and make it to this wall where the game turns you around and says, okay, hit the jumps again, stupid. Then when you do hit the jumps again, now that you're going to the right, you can get into the next area's entrance. This mechanic makes the player view each section two ways when planning on where to go. What jumps were possible when approaching from right to left, and what jumps were possible when approaching from left to right. The clever level design makes this a core mechanic throughout the game, allowing for lots of snaking back and forth between the areas of the map using the same exact jumps in different ways depending on your direction. I'll be honest, to me, designing a map with this mechanic sounds miserable, but Tripp was able to pull it off with great effect. Figuring out some of these jump puzzles was extremely fun and challenging. Luckily for me, I never found anything in the whole map too tricky to figure out the route. All it took for me was a little trial and error, but I can't speak for every player's experience. From here, I was back to the old DanCorona, an addicted Foddian gamer who can't stop playing the game even for a second, just grinding away jump after jump, fall after fall. I ascended to this desert section where the entrance to it teaches you about tight corridors and holding against your direction to ascend step by step. Then we get some low-hanging ceilings teaching the player to short hop, and we even get a double wall bounce. After snaking back and forth through the level, we reach this glowing pad which acts as a bounce pad that launched us high into the air to our next section. Vines or flowers section is pretty straightforward, again snaking back and forth upwards. The main challenge being more step-by-step jumps here that really drive home that skill of being able to climb stairs-like obstacles precisely. And then we were into mines. The mines give you a safe space to teach you about these blue glowy floors. We're introduced to a run boost mechanic that allows the player to jump further distances and reach increased speeds. We're also introduced to these electric platforms which shock your character and knock you back, making the player lose control for a second. But after some low ceiling jumps and some run boosting, we make it to this cheeky jump that I totally never failed once. Son of a bitch. No. This section had 4 wall jumps back to back to ascend, and then a blind jump to catch this ledge, which was pretty cool. Then here's where I reached my first roadblock. There's this electricity on this platform, and I had no idea how to get through the gap and jump far enough over to the next ledge. But then I realized something. Oh, I didn't realize I can land on the lanterns. Yeah, it turns out I was just being stupid, and the jump is actually not that hard. The next section introduces these green platforms, which I couldn't figure out what they do. What does the green do? I eventually realized that they actually increase your movement speed in midair, allowing you to stray farther and reach further ledges. I adapted to it nicely except for this leaf, which caught me lacking. I forgot about the leaf. Then I reached my second roadblock of the run, which honestly was kind of dumb on my part. After you jump on these lamps, what you're supposed to do is follow this wooden arrow sign and jump over these boxes to continue to the right. For some reason, I decided to ignore the arrow and go for this complicated jump on the left, which actually leads to a skip. To do this, you need to jump on the leftmost edge of this block and do a non-jump input off the wall so that you nicely land central on the singular block. Then you do a wall jump input back to the left to ascend to this ledge where you need to hold the opposite direction so you slow down and don't bonk on the stairs and change the direction too early. Then you need to jump up the stairs and into this wall to go back to the right and jump onto the jump pad, which goes over the intended and now skipped path into the next section. As it turns out, I just taught myself to do the skip thinking it was the right way to go, and after failing it tons of times, it became a normal route. Lava section is where the game starts to ramp up in difficulty. This section has very claustrophobic jumps, winding back and forth across the section. You need to utilize slowing down and tap adjusting in the air to get into these tight gaps. With some time, I mastered most of the jumps in the section until I reached our next setback. On the left wall in the section, you're supposed to wall jump back and forth to gain enough height to get to the top of this block. However, my timings were off and I found myself struggling to gain the height. It was here that I took a mental break and asked my friend Flexi for some advice.
So, do you wall jump off this wall as well?
Yeah, I keep trying to just go like coyote frames off the left corner and wall jump.
Because I have not had an issue about what you explained, so I pretty much just wall jump back and forth like this and then build up momentum.
Oh, what? How do you do it fast enough? I keep losing height. You just have to go back and forth left to right?
Yeah.
So basically, I just sucked at it. But after some experimenting, some practice, I was able to successfully do the bouncing mechanic and kept on going. However, I didn't really like this mechanic. The actual wall jump mechanic is a good tool for level design that on its own doesn't take that much skill to perform. But the repeated back and forth timings at this gap's distance are tedious and don't really add much except for frustration to the map. And it's not the good kind of frustration where the player's mad at themselves for their own skill level not being up to par. It's the bad frustration where the player starts to blame the game, which is the opposite of what you want your players to do when developing a Foddian game. The jump entails jumping off the wall with a wall jump, and then after bonking off the opposite wall, holding your direction back towards the yellow wall to wall jump again. You do this back and forth until you reach the top. While I was doing this mechanic, I felt as though I was executing the right inputs, and it turns out my timings were just slightly off. To me, these repeated wall jumps just felt clunky. It was the first time in the whole game I felt like I disliked the mechanic. The jumps just felt like the sole janky and stagnant mechanic in an otherwise free-flowing level design that complemented the movement mechanics. But I kept trying until I got it down and moved on. Next up was the space section, which had some of the most technical jumps in the game. The section loops like this, and utilizes blue speed floors and yellow jump walls. This section is the culmination of basically everything you've learned so far from the previous sections, and it really feels like the section that forces you to get really good at the precise platforming in the game. With just under 3 hours played, I reached the end of the space section and the start of the final hurdle of the game, the ending. It starts with these corridor jumps that look very simple, but they force the player to stall their movement in midair and enter each corridor without bonking and falling. This was my biggest obstacle yet. So, I spent the next 2.5 hours on attempts with every failure dropping me brutally back to Vines section, losing almost 50% of map progress with each fall. But finally, nearing 2 AM at my wit's end, I finally hit the jumps. I was rewarded with this section where you need to use the repeated wall jump mechanic, and I physically could not do it. Doing all these precise inputs had me pressing the keys on my keyboard with so much force that my hands and wrists were literally burning. Not to mention I was already bad at this mechanic. After trying for like 30 minutes, I was nothing but frustrated, unable to climb using the tedious wall jumps. So after playing for a solid 6 hours straight and destroying my hands with constant precise inputs, it was 2:30 AM and I needed to go to sleep because I had work at 9 AM the next day. So I called it quits for the night and started chatting with the dev. We talked about the design of the game for a while and even discussed the wall jump mechanic. Tripp told me that the wall jump mechanic section that I was stuck in was meant to just be filler, sort of like a buffer between the corridor jump stress and the gauntlet of the final section. He said he did not intend for players to get stuck here, and we went on to further discuss the ins and outs of the wall jump mechanic. He also mentioned something that blew my mind. This was actually the first game he's ever made. He revealed to me a video that he made alongside with the release of the game talking about the game's development, and I was blown away. I couldn't believe it. This game got me to play it for 6 hours straight with its fun and constant Foddian action, and it was his first ever game. Props to Tripp because he seriously nailed every aspect of what a Foddian should be, and on his first try? If you want to see the development process, there's a link in the description to Tripp's video. Absolutely wild stuff. So the next day I came back refreshed and ready to go. Fortunately for me, Tripp, after speaking with me the night before, made the wall jumps at the end a little easier to ascend by closing the gap between the walls ever so slightly. And now here we are. The final gauntlet. Inspired by Pogostuck Map 2, the last section of Step by Step was exploding block jumps hanging over the entire map. And then, I did something amazing. I hit the ending sequence first try. If I just one try this, how fucking elite would I be? No. I'm not elite, I'm not elite, I'm not elite. Yeah, there was no fucking shot. This section was awesome, and even though the jumps look simple, it gets your heart pumping. Once you jump off a block, the block explodes and disappears, making zero room for error. This mechanic opened up interesting new options for the level design, giving players new jumping puzzles like this one, where you break blocks on a pillar while precisely bouncing off a wall to lower yourself down, enough to make the next jump under an overhang. While this section was treacherous, dropping you down to the space section if you fall, the jumps themselves weren't that difficult. Well, except for this one part. This roadblock was the last thing standing in my way from completing the map. Halfway through the block section, you enter this tiny chimney chute with these tiny breakable blocks to jump on. The trick is to again slow down in between each jump, but the tight chimney adds so much panic. And if you accidentally break a block, you just are kind of stuck here and you have to throw yourself off the edge and climb all the way back up. It took me so many attempts before I was able to overcome this obstacle. But then, I was home free. Let's fucking go, baby. Let's go. Clutch. After so many fucking hours. Sub 10 though. Sub 9.5, I think. 2720. Wait, hold. 18,332,000 jumps. 9 hours, 27 minutes. After 9 hours and 27 minutes, I completed Step by Step. And according to the dev, I'm only the second person post-beta testers to ever complete the game. I'm honestly blown away by this game considering it's Tripp's first ever game he's developed. He really studied up and executed everything a Foddian needs to be in order to be a fun and effective challenge for gamers. It's an incredibly well-rounded Foddian that 100% deserves more attention. The speedrunning potential is also insane, with skips in the map, fast and flowing movement and level design, and the incredibly precise inputs required in order to perfect the movement. Tripp has told me he'd love to make more maps and further develop the game if enough people take interest in it, and personally I think that would be awesome. If you're a fan of Foddian games, please go check out Step by Step. If it had me hooked for the past 9 hours of my free time, I think it's definitely worth your time to give it a try.